All right, so part 3 of building Friendcatchers. So the place we left off was building this potential friends directory. And one thing I sort of skipped over for the sake of time is transmitting the correct image URL to these people. So I was just using a default image there. The problem was that we had this function in the user model that tried to get the full URL of the avatar. The problem is it didn't really know the default host, and that was kind of messy. So what I realized is we can actually pass in only path, true, so that it only returns the extension and doesn't care about the base URL. So I'm going to rename that to path, and then we can go to potential friends controller, and to include it, since it's a method, we can just do that. Okay. And then let's check out view to see if it's actually getting passed in. So I'll refresh the page, potential friends, user, scorey, and there it is, the avatar image path. So now we could go to potential friends, view, change the source. Instead of an unsplash image, we can do user score, scorey, avatar image path, and then when it refreshes, there we go. Here are the proper images that we uploaded last time. Cool. Looks like there's some sort of border, so let's remove that. Oh, it's the background. I'll just delete that. There we go. Maybe we want like a shadow. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. So that finishes that. And the next thing we can move on to is I want to actually send these connections and get that going. But I also need to do a full profile. So the ability to click into someone and see the full details of that person. I think for this, I'm just going to start with the connection. Feels like more meaningful progress. So to do that, one thing I was thinking about was in the schema, we already have user scores, which is what generates, the user score and creates the pairing between one user and another. So this is, if we want to create a connection, that kind of seems like almost a duplicate or that they belong together because you're creating the connection on a user scoring pair between these two users. But they're also kind of different. So if I were to combine them, I would probably just create a field of like connection status and the time of the connection. But that also, there are certain things where it does feel like a separate entity. So let's just create a model. So I'll do Rails G model connection, and then we need, let's call it requester, and this will be references. Requestee is also references. And then we'll do a status, and then we get the default timestamps, so that should be fine. I don't think we're going to have a message associated with it. So let's start with this. Okay. So we could go to the migration. Foreign key. So let's see how we did user scores. So in the migration, I had to specify that the foreign key is to the table users. So I have to do a similar thing here. Okay, and then we don't want status to be null. And that should be good. Then we'll go to connection RB. And similar thing here with the user score. We have to say that it's to the user. And then change the foreign key. And we should be good. So we'll do Rails DB migrate. Now we're going to need just the rest of the CRUD functionality. So we're going to need a controller. So I'll just copy this guy. This will be connections controller. And we're definitely going to need an index, but we're also going to need a create. So we're going to create a connection with requester ID is the current user. Requestee ID is going to be a parameter. And then that's pretty much all we need, the requestee ID. And then the status will initialize to, let's just say pending. Well, we're going to have to come up with standardized names like pending, accepted, rejected. So that creates the connection. So I think we could do, I think this is how default Rails does it. It like initiates it with new, and then if connection save, then it's a success, or else it's a failure. Actually, we can just pass in the connection. I think it's errors.fullMessages. Let's see. Errors.fullMessages. Okay. And then a status of 500. All right. So then we need routes. We're probably going to have a destroy action later on, but don't need it for now. All right, now that we have this create function, what we want to do is actually make this button call this action. So we're going to head back into, this is the potential friends index, and this is the connect button. So here's the link. We actually want this to be a button. No href. On the click, create connection. And then we'll pass in the scorey ID. So then we'll import Axios to make Ajax requests. And then create connection, requestee ID, Axios dot post connections and then requestee ID is this. This would be pretty cool if it works on the first try. It rarely happens that way. So then if we get a successful response, let's just say it worked. Or if it doesn't, then we'll see what happened. Okay. So I'll open up console in preparation for an error, and let's see. So I'm currently logged in as user 1. Let's say we want to connect with Gail. There we go. Okay. That looks like an easy error to fix. Obviously. Okay, let's try it again. Cool, that worked. Okay. So now what that means is if we check Rails console, we can check the first connection is between requester ID 4 and 5, which looks right. So if I find user 4, yep, that is our first user. Sweet. Okay, so now that we can actually successfully request it, we want to change this message to what the pending connection is, right? So let's see how we're going to do that. So if this works, we want to change the button text. So this is driven by user score scoree. So what if we just created a new attribute just in view that said, so instead of only taking the ID, what if we just took in the scoree and then we passed in the scoree ID? So that way we have access to this object. And we could do something like scoree dot connection status equals like connection pending, or maybe like request pending. So then here, if we had like user score scoree dot connection status, or if that doesn't exist, then we'll just do connect. Let's just see if that works. The reason that is really dumb is because if you refresh the page, it would have no idea. Okay, so we need to do this a little higher up. So I think we need a user model, or sorry, user method of like, or actually it's a user, let's see. So we're including a bunch of different things here. The scoree, user topics, yeah, the user topics for that scoree. But we somehow need to translate this new connection object in there as well. I'm going to pause this for now so I can think about it and then we can continue. Okay, so here's what I'm going to try. I don't know if it's a good idea, but similar to how we passed in my topics as a separate thing, let's just do connections. So that'll be the current user connections. And the result we're going to want is something that looks like this. So it'll be the requestee ID and then like the status. So the way we can get that is to just take it as JSON and then only. Well, it's not only taking the fields because then it's just an array. But I want this to be a hash. So you could just reference the key. Well, let's just go with the defaults for now because it's probably a default for a reason. So we only want requestee, ID, and status. And let's just see what that actually comes out with. So now we need to pass in connections, and that'll equal connections to JSON. I don't know if I actually do this JSON passing to view in the best way, but it works. So now we'll take that as a prop. And let's just see what comes back. Undefined method connections. Okay, well that's because we didn't say it has many of them. Okay, so now in view, we can say here's the first connection with a requestee ID of 5 and status pending. So it would be cool if we could just have it, as I said, as a hash instead of an array, because then we could just call the key and get the value of the connection. But for now, let's just have it find in that array. So what we want is, let's just create a method of connection status that takes in a requestee ID and it returns the status. So we're looking for through all the elements if the connection's requestee ID equals requestee ID, then we'll take the status. Now, if it doesn't find any, then this is going to be an error. So just to be safe, I'll separate it out. This seems probably way extra, but just to be safe. So I guess we'll return nothing if there's no connection status. So what we'll do here is we'll call connection status and pass in the scoree ID. And if that's nil, then we'll just write connect. So I'll want to change the icon of the button too, but we'll just see if this works. Cool. So now we have pending. Let's add on request. Oh, obviously. Okay. Yeah, so we'll probably want a function that makes it a little bit prettier in terms of how we're describing the status as opposed to just being the unique ID. All right, so this icon isn't necessarily correct, so we're going to want to have a better pending icon. Maybe a clock is the best we can do here. Or maybe this. Let's do an hourglass. Maybe there isn't one here. Yeah, I think the best we could do is this clock. Okay, so obviously we need to change things twice in terms of the connection status. So we're going to want to check, I'll just paste this SVG first. So we're going to want to check the connection status in the template here as like a wrapper. So if we only have pending and connect now, so I guess if it's pending, this isn't great, but good for now. And then, or else we'll do the generic connect. This will be okay. So now if we need the classes here to match. Okay. And then hover, there's nothing really to do here. So we'll remove that hover state. All right, not bad. So now we're done with the sending of the request. Now we can either list out the connections on the new connections page, even though I don't have a design for it, or we can do the individual profile. But I feel like just for a little bit of completeness, now that we're able to send the connections, we should actually retrieve them and show them. So let's do that. It won't necessarily be pretty, but we'll get started. Okay. So we have the connections controller. We're going to want to fetch them. So this will be, we'll get the current users, connections, and let's just return everything for now and see how it goes. We're obviously going to need a lot more information, like about the person they're trying to connect with, as opposed to just their ID. Okay. So the next thing we need is an actual view. So let's create the connections folder. And then we need index.html. We're going to create a view component, and then we're going to pass that in. Now we need to go to our app.js and make this component. And the last step here is to add it as component folder, and then this is just the structure that I use. It kind of replicating Rails views except in the Vue.js components. Feels a little bit more organized, but you definitely don't have to do it that way. Alright, now we're gonna take in the props of connections, and then let's just see what that looks like. Alright, now if I refresh, there we go. So we have the connections here. But we're going to need a lot more information about this requestee. So let's try to make that work. So when we're doing this connection, we have to include the requestee. So we did this on potential friends. Let's see how we did that. So it joined user bucket and topic, and then included it within the as JSON. So let's give that a go. So we're joining on requestee, and then as JSON, we're going to include. Let's see if that's how they did it. Include this. I wonder what the format is if I didn't want to include the only score. Oh, there we go. Okay. So requestee, and then we have all the information about them. But we also need their picture, kind of like what we did before. So we're going to include methods, avatar image path. There we go. Okay. So I think this is a good enough start in terms of information to start building out a table. So let's just grab a nice, easy table. This looks really close, so let's go for this. So I'm going to go back to connections and then index view. And let's throw in this massive table and start cleaning it up. So here's what the table looks like. I don't know why it keeps asking me to translate the page. Oh, that's interesting. Tailwind UI finally realized that we don't want to have to manually delete every row. Cool. So what we actually want is they haven't accepted. So if they haven't accepted the connection yet, we only want to show their first name, their picture, and the status, pretty much. And then maybe like a cancel button. So we're not going to need title or role. Which also means, well, we're not going to need their email. So we'll get rid of, this is title, and then we'll get rid of role. And this is where it's at. So obviously this table doesn't need to be so wide. So let's change that to a max width of 3XL. It's still really wide. There's just not a lot of information here. And then we'll center this. And add some space. Okay, good enough for now. So now let's actually get the information here. So we want a separate row for every pending connection. So we'll do for connection in connections. And then the actual information is coming from the connection.requestee, and then we'll do .firstname. There we go, so that worked. And now we need to change this image source to be connection.requestee.avatar image path. Cool. And then the status will change to connection requestee, or no, connection.status. Pending. So now we just need to change the colors. So for now, let's just create a method of status color. I don't know how great this is going to be, but so this takes in a connection status. Well, I guess we could have done it inline here, but to keep it clean, we can do this. So I'll just return, or I'll just have a hash that takes the status as the key and then gives back the classes. So let's say we want background green. And it's probably better if I create a pill class, but for now we can hard code it. So normally I would probably do like pill green and then have that as a custom CSS class. But we haven't really had to use pills anywhere else, so maybe we don't need it. Let's say like, I don't know if we actually want to show rejected. Maybe it should just disappear. So actually pending should be yellow. And then maybe we have like accepted, and that's what's green. But we haven't dealt with accepted yet. And then we'll pass in the status key. So now here we can remove the colors, do dynamic class of status color, and it breaks. Let's see why. Status color is not a function. There we go. So now we have the name, the picture, the status. Now let's do something that you can actually cancel the connection. So we're only going to cancel the connection if the status is pending. So button VIF connection status is pending. And you can see we really have to commit to this word pending because we're just using it all over the place and sort of treating it like a unique ID. That's not going to change. But if we ever change it, not only do we have to backfill the database, but we also have to go through the code base and change it. All right. But that's better than, in this case, having a separate database table that has the different statuses and then you use their foreign key. That's just extra. So we'll change this color to blue. And then on click, let's cancel the connection. And it just needs a connection ID. So then we'll have a method cancel connection. And we haven't created this route yet, but let's just assume we have it. So we're going to delete this connection. Then I think delete requires prepending it with params. This is probably not going to work. The other thing I realized before we finish this off, one of the columns we may want to have is when it was requested. And we have that because we can use the connection created at. Okay, obviously that is not a friendly looking timestamp. So let's create a filter called I don't know if I want it to be a relative time, like you requested 10 minutes ago, or an exact time. So let's just call it friendly timestamp. And I may want to extract this to more of a global filter if we reuse it elsewhere. But for now, I'll just say filters. Then we'll do friendly timestamp time. And then we need moment. So then we'll return moment time format, and then we'll do, what is it? MMM, I think D, and then we'll want the time. Oh, we don't even have moment, so let's add that. Maybe it needs to be moment.js. Nope, just yarn add moment. I'm just restarting the server to see if that fixes it. Probably not. Oh, I guess it did. Okay, August 3rd at 8:14. So we'll add in A, which is AM or PM. And then this kind of looks weird without the year. So let's add in the year. August 30th, 2020, 8:14 a.m. That doesn't look great. So I want this text to be a little softer. So we'll try 600. I also feel like this should be right aligned. So we'll do text right. And then in the header, we'll do text right. Okay. Well, that's not terrible for now. So one thing I'm thinking though is the time actually doesn't matter. So maybe we could just do the date. And we could do friendly date. Okay, I think that looks a lot better. Okay, so now we need to get back to this cancel button. So we're sending a delete to connections. So now we need a route that includes destroy. And then we'll go to the controller and we need a destroy action. So before the destroy, we need to set connection. This is sort of like default Rails scaffold. So we'll look for the current user's connections.find. So we'll find it by just the connection ID. So this means it'll also permit connection ID, which is just ID. Okay, so now before action, set connection, and then only on destroy. So now we'll try, I don't know if the condition actually works here, but if connection destroy, well, that's an assumption, right? So if canceling a connection is actually destroying it versus setting the status to canceled, if we destroy it, it just won't show up anymore. If we set it as just a status to cancel, it'll never be deleted, so that way we have sort of analytics on it. But we'll then need to just not show ones here that were canceled. So let's actually, I don't really know what the right call is. We can still have it wrapped in the destroy action just because that sounds correct, even if we're not actually destroying it. So maybe we could just update the status to be canceled. Okay, so if we're setting the status to canceled, let's go to the connections index. We probably don't even want to bother with the ones that are canceled in terms of displaying them. So let's just say where not status is canceled. Let's see what happens. Now, if this works, we can either refresh the page or just refetch connections. Or we can just hide this and not even reload the data, so it's kind of faking it. But for now, let's just see if the button works. So we're deleting the connections, we're passing the ID, then we'll get an alert if it works. Nothing. Okay. Cancel connection, connection ID. Why did that not do anything? Oh, because I wrote at cancel. Duh. It must be funny watching a live stream and you see someone make an error and you're like, oh, you messed up. But I just glaze over it until 10 minutes later. Okay, so I click cancel and it failed. 404 not found. So it's not even finding this route. I think because I need to do I don't think this is passing correctly. So I'm going to try putting the ID just right here. Cool, that worked. And now when I refresh, we have no connections. Cool. So now if I go to potential friends, we can see that this is back to connect. Now if I connect here, ooh, that didn't work. Let's see why. Requestee must exist. Interesting. So it doesn't know this user. Requestee must exist. So when we're creating the connection, the requestee ID is taken in here. On potential friends is where we're making the connection. So this is taking the scory ID. So we're passing in the scory. Ah, okay. We changed that, so it just needs to pass in the scory as opposed to the ID. So now when I connect, that worked, but this didn't refresh. So we're going to have to fix that. But when I refresh the page, Now it's there, and then I can do this again. And interesting. Okay. So because I canceled the connection with Gale, it looks like it's not really doing anything when I make this here. So the first thing I want to check is it's probably creating duplicates because we never actually told it that it couldn't. So if I do connection.count, there's 4. Because we have the canceled, and then we just tried creating the same one over and over and over. So I need to destroy all of these. And then we need to go into connection. And we need to verify or validate uniqueness of requestee ID. I think this is the format. With the scope of requester ID. So basically you can't create a connection with the same pairing of requestee ID. So here we had the validates uniqueness of. So let's see that format. So we had that and then the scope of the user. So that was pretty close. This should do the trick. So now that we can't validate the uniqueness and we're not actually destroying the connection, what will happen is if I cancel a connection and then I want to try it again, the problem is that the destroy doesn't remove it, it just updates the status. So when I go to create a new connection, it's going to fail because it's going to say this pairing of the requester ID and the requestee already exists. So what I'm thinking is we need to do like a find or create by. And then what we could do is I want to see if there's a find or new by. Okay. So maybe what I'll do is actually just destroy this and keep it simple. So we'll remove this where. We'll just make this a simple destroy. And then we'll create a new one there. So let's just make sure we have no existing connections. And then we could go back here. Undefined method validates. Oh, I forgot the E. So now I can click connect, that worked, and then connect, that worked. So now they're both pending. We can go to connections. We see they're both pending here. Now I can click cancel on first. So that's going to go away. And then here, it goes back to connect. And now when I try to connect again, that should work. And we're back to where we are. Okay, so to wrap this up, the last few things to take care of are just refreshing this data when there's an action to reflect what they did. So the first thing we'll do is for the potential friends, when they click the connect, we need to update it. All right, so create a connection, then we want to refresh potential friends. So we're looking at connection status. So what we could do is, if we know, we could do this two ways. So the first one is just refetch all the data, which is kind of dumb, but it would work. Or we could just insert the status to this one connection. So I'm going to try the second method first. What we kind of need to fake is for this connections to change its status. So I'm going to take this line here, and we just need to find the connection. So we want to find where the requester ID is equal to the scoree ID. Now what we could do is, to keep it a little bit drier and not repeat the assumption and logic again, we can set connection equal to the response data. I think that should work. So if we do that, then we need to go to the connections controller. And then on a successful create, instead of returning the created connection, we just need to return the connection. That'll already pass as JSON. And let's see if that works. So what'll happen is the connection will change, and then because that changes, it'll reevaluate the connection status equal to pending, I think. So I'm going to cancel one of these. So now when I connect, it should automatically update, which it doesn't. Cannot read property data of undefined. Okay, round 2. So that didn't work. Let's check in view what the actual data properties currently are. So this connections here, request EID number 5. Oh, it's because there actually isn't an existing connection. So we almost need to, yeah, you know what? I think we just need to reload. Like we want this connections array again, but we don't want to have to recalculate everything on the page. So one assumption we can do is just assume the same format, which is kind of risky. We can just recreate this object and push it. So we'll say the requestee ID is the scoree ID, and then the status is pending. The problem with this is that we're assuming in 2 different places that the right status is pending. There's other ways around this, like separately using the connections index action to just pull the connections, as opposed to putting them all in the potential friends index controller with all those instance variables. So let's see if this works. Still not working. Well, let's see if it actually pushed it. So we have it looks like it is correct because the variable updated. But maybe it's just not reevaluating the values. Okay, so maybe this isn't the best way. So if I get, let's see, if I just get the index here and it returns JSON, maybe that does the trick. So the thing here is this is both the connections page and potentially the connections. So we're gonna need to do respond to format. So if it's HTML, we're fine, but if it's JSON, then we're gonna want to render JSON of connections. And let's see if this does anything useful. So if that's the case, then we want to do call get connections. Then we'll set this dot connections equal to the response data. If this works, that would be pretty cool. Hey, look at that. So now it refetched the connections. The thing is, it's returning more data, but I think that's not terrible. Maybe what we want to do is just in here, what we could do as maybe we could split this up. Not super clean, but if request format is HTML, then we can do this entire block. But if it is, then we can do because we only need two things. We only need requestee ID and the status. Let's see if this works. So else if request format is JSON. Okay, so that looks like it worked, and then connections only returns requestee ID and status. So when I refresh, these connection objects are now the same because we're only extracting what we need. So that seems like a pretty decent idea. So that works. Now I know we're at an hour now, but to finish this out, now we want this connections to reload as well when you cancel. Oh, but this is annoying because on this page, when we refresh, we're going to need all that data as well. So what I mean is when we cancel the connection here, we want to reload these connections to not have this. So if we know that cancel is always going to remove the person if it worked, then we don't even need to make another response. We can do this dot connections. Oh, this is mutating a prop, so let's see how it behaves. So we're going to want to filter out the connection if the connection ID is equal to the connection ID. So when I cancel, that worked, but it says avoid mutating a prop. I don't know if that's actually necessarily a problem here. Because this is sort of the parent component. Like the ERB is not going to re-render. It would be different if it was a view component right above this. But maybe if I set like a data of editable connections, that is so weird. And then we'll do JSON parse, JSON.stringify. So this just creates like a whole separate copy. So then we're going to want to mutate this. And then we're going to need to loop through the editable connections. So now when I hit cancel, so the editable connections is fine there. Okay, so let's try this again. Sometimes it doesn't re-render because there's no key. Nope, that wasn't it. So it's working, but it's not updating this here. And there's no error, which is weird. Okay, so for now I'll just leave it as mutating the prop directly. And we'll let the console get mad. Oh, interesting. Same problem with this as well. Okay, well that's something to figure out, I guess. Huh. That didn't work. I thought it worked before. Let's see. That's so weird. It worked before, but it didn't give the error. I mean, it gave the error in the console, but it was just a warning. But this still worked. All right, one more time. I'm gonna try this. So now we have our copy. We need to edit this. Then we'll loop through that. That's still not working. I must be missing something really obvious. Because the button is working, because it actually does remove it on a page refresh. So then the response on that response will do, we're resetting it equal to filter. Oh, duh. Okay. So we need to filter it if it doesn't equal that connection ID. Oh my god. Alright, so when we do this again, there we go. Okay. And we're not getting that error. So that's good. Man. So maybe I could just do this instead of unmounted, I could just do this directly here. Okay, so that works. All right, now we need to take care of similar thing with potential friends. And then we'll wrap it up, because this is probably really boring. Okay, so the thing is here we are resetting connections to the response data. So let's do a similar thing. We'll say editable connections. And again, so the reason I have to do the JSON parse JSON stringify, maybe there's a different way to do it. But if I just referred to it as this dot connections, it would just be an alias. So when I impacted this, it would just be a reference to this anyway and sort of defeat the purpose. So now that we have editable connections, we need to set that equal to that. And then we need to find any other reference of connections, which is just in the connection status, which would be that. Okay. So now when I click this, it updates, we get no error, and that's great. And then all is working. Cool, so we'll wrap it there, part 3. To summarize, we got the correct image passing through to potential friends. We got these connect buttons to actually create a connection request. And then in connections here, we got the ones that the connections we sent. So the things that are still left in this workflow is, well, if someone else requests to meet you, we need to show that here as well. So I think we're going to need like two separate tables almost, the ones you sent out and then the ones that people sent you. And when I built this, I didn't even think about that actually. But now that I realize it, that'll be the next step. So I'll see you in the next part.